After you watch this video, I want you to go over and click on the link below and check out Chris, my friend Chris in California. The Long Cut is his channel. And I just got home and I watched a video he did, the top 10 albums I listen to most. Now, there is a little caveat, a little asterisk, and it makes sense. These aren't necessarily his favorite albums. Well, actually, these are not his favorite albums. These are not necessarily my favorite albums, but when you have a large collection, even if you don't have a large collection, and you want to hear something, you want to listen to something, and sometimes the more you have, the more difficult it is to choose something. I suppose that happens in any collection. But you have go-to albums. At least we have go-to albums. Chris obviously has go-to albums, and he picked 10 records that he just grabs. Not necessarily his best albums. I decided to follow up and respond to Chris. So thank you, Chris. Go support him and link up below and subscribe, please. He's a good guy, and there's a lot of good reasons to support him and his channel. But I picked 10, 11. Bonus things are a thing when you showcase these records. And these are 10 plus 1 records that when I don't know what to play, these are 10 of the albums I go to. Obviously there are more. I'm setting this up way too long, which I do. I tend to kind of pontificate on these things, but I'm going to show you 10 albums, which they make me feel good every time for different reasons. And the first one, I had to put a Beatle record, and of course, not my favorite Beatle album, but when I just in a mood to hear their voices together, the blending of Lennon and McCartney, the arrangements, I go for the sort of the earlier period than the later. Now, of course, Revolver is my favorite. I like that sweet spot of 1966, and then Sgt. Pepper 67, Rubber Soul 65. And I choose this record. I pull this record a lot. The opening 2 tracks, to me, are the best vocals Lennon has possibly ever sang. No Reply and I'm a Loser. Just the haunting vocals on No Reply when that comes in. You got Babies in Black as well. I'll Follow the Sun, Paul McCartney's beautiful, sweet voice. Such a simple song, such a beautiful song. Now, when I was a kid, I never liked Mr. Moonlight on Beatles 65. I think it was the final track on side 1 on that, the American compilation. But I've learned to I am in awe of Lennon's voice on that. When he screams out Mr. Moonlight and that like organ comes in, it's friggin' sublime. It's amazing. Kansas City, I could either way with McCartney's cover of that Lieber and Stoller song, which later they finally gave a credit to Little Richard because that hey, hey, hey part. So that publishing credit changed years later. 8 Days a Week, Words of Love, the harmonies of Lennon McCartney on that Buddy Holly song are impeccable. And I'm a huge Buddy Holly fan. And I think I got turned on to Buddy Holly really because of the Beatles with this album, or with actually Beatles 65, which came out December of 64. But Every Little Thing, I don't want to spoil the party. Great country song Lennon McCartney wrote. What You're Doing, the drumming on that, beautiful, beautiful song. And even Harrison covering Carl Perkins and Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby. But this is the sort of the easy digestible, and I mean that with all, in such a positive way. It's such a wonderful record, and it is my go-to Beatles record when I don't know what to play. So there we go. Next is an album that is all spiritual, sexual, sensual emotion, and a piano-based album by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, and that's Boatman's Call. Every song on this is a perfect record, and I've showed this album many times, but it's an easy album to digest. It's dark, it's dirgy, and it's gorgeous record. So an album I frequently pull out when I don't know what to play, when I can't really pinpoint the mood I'm in. This always kind of puts me in a mood, or even if it's sort of a dark album in some ways, an emotional album. It lifts my spirits personally. Then I want to show this album. This is the Byrds, Notorious Byrd Brothers. Now, I've said many times that the Byrds are my top three bands, along with the Kinks. I did not pick a Kinks album for this because it's not necessarily about my favorite bands, even though the Byrds are my one of my top favorite bands. Fifth Dimension is my favorite Byrds album, but there's a mood to this album, this sort of country psychedelic, psycho cowboy that just nails it when you're in the mood. And the beautiful recordings, and of course, Wasn't Born to Follow, and Old John Robertson, and Going Back, that cover of the Carole King Coffin song. There's a country flavor to it, a folk flavor to it again that brings, that adds some psychedelia and some phase shifting and things like that. It's a beautiful, beautiful record. You know, Crosby gets pushed out by this point. He's on a little bit of this, but I love this record. When I don't know what to play, I play that album frequently. And this is one I play a lot. And this is my favorite of the British folk rock scene of the late 60s. And that's Liege and Leaf by Fairport Convention. Of course, Sandy Denny, Richard Thompson, and the gang. There's just the updating of these traditional folk songs and original songs on here. And I think Sandy Denny has one of the most beautiful female voices in folk popular music ever. I love her voice. And this is such a strong album. Again, every track is solid. It has a mood to it. And it has sort of an acoustic feel with electric instruments that just makes it a perfect album. And again, another album when I don't know what to put on. Here's one in another vein, but again, I just like the feel on both sides. Side one and side two are completely different, and that is Hounds of Love, Kate Bush. Possibly, you know, I usually tilt toward The Dreaming as maybe my number one. So it's not about that, but a lot of times this is probably her best album, although The Dreaming is even more adventurous than this, the one just prior to this. But side two of The Ninth Wave is just, oh God. This is a theatrical album without being gimmicky. You know, where I like to mock prog records, as much as I love certain prog bands, sometimes it's jarring and the mood, I'm taken out of being within the music, if that makes any sense. And this doesn't do it to me. This doesn't do that to me, I should say. This is a brilliant album, and I think it's pretty much a perfect album. 1985. Hounds of Love. Another album that really crosses over, I like folk psychedelic. Now, this album is really not psychedelic, but it's got the closest they've got to a little bit of that studio, I shouldn't say gimmicky, because that like really forces it, but that's Simon and Garfunkel Bookends. What a perfect album, 1968. Every song. The opening of Bookends theme, then Save the Life of My Child, where you have that background haunting. For years, I didn't even hear it. Maybe because it's the version I had, and that version of Hello Darkness, My Old Friend, and the reverb in the background when that interlude happens in that song. But what a dramatic song. Again, a cinematic record in so many ways. Of course, America's a beautiful thing. I mean, I think Paul Simon or Garfunkel haven't sounded better, as much as everyone loves their final album, Bridge Over Troubled Water. Beautiful record. This is the go-to. And this is now my pull-out because it sounds so good too. But again, as you can see here, maybe except for Kate Bush and Nick Cave, I love good vocal harmonizing. That's why I loved the Everly Brothers. And I'll pull those kind of records, that harmony and that, that type of music. Buddy Holly's not really harmony, although it goes into like the Beatles, their harmonies, and of course, Simon & Garfunkel, the Byrds, and Fairport Convention all have that. And I'm very attracted to melody and harmony vocals. So 1968, that. I mean, this happens to be my favorite Rolling Stones album, but there's something about this, again, I see this as an acoustic album, although it's only partially acoustic, with obviously Prodigal Son, Stray Cat Blues, Factory Girl, Salt of the Earth, Dear Doctor, No Expectations. But Sympathy for the Devil is probably the best song they ever recorded, the most dramatic, again, cinematic. That word pops up on this stuff because I visualize my music as much as I'm talking about the music stupid, the sound. I have visualizations either musically or personal things I've gone through when I heard these songs, different moments. So another album from 1968, Beggar's Banquet, one of my top 10 most listenable, most listened to albums. We're getting into the acoustic side again somewhat with electronic, and it almost crosses in folk rock, but another brilliant album. But there's electric, obviously, and this is probably the latest album in terms of artists, in terms of temporal. This is early 90s. Early 90s. 92, is it? But Automatic for the People, REM. This is my favorite REM record. So sometimes the album you choose to play that you listen to most is your favorite. But again, as you saw earlier, it's not always the case. REM, this album, Everybody Hurts, what a beautiful song. Sidewinder, Sleeps Tonight, obviously, with their not reclamation, but their pulling of In the Jungle, the Mighty Jungle, the Lion Sleeps Tonight, Drive, Try Not to Breathe, Fuck Me Kitten, Man on the Moon, Night Swimming. The piano playing on that is just gorgeous, but this is the one. Yeah, I love the IRS stuff, but this is Warner Brothers, and this is the one that perfected everything for me. The album just prior to this with Losing My Religion, my memories of that are literally holding my young son up, running around the room playing that song loud, but it's not the one I go to the most. Lastly, nope, we're not there yet, but I pull this album all the time. It is my favorite Who album. Well, Tommy actually won, I think, in my ranking video I did, but this was a very close second. And I could flip on a dime. There's something about the enjoyment of this. It's like watching television but listening to it in rock and roll form. I'm one that really likes the use of the little fake commercials that literally weren't so fake. They really tried to sell those and get sponsorship early on when they made this record. This is a brilliant pop psychedelic masterpiece. I think that I Can See for Miles should have been a number one hit, and I think Pete Townsend too was very disappointed that it wasn't. This is a early UK track copy, and it's sublime. It sounds amazing. Every song on here is great. This is a pop, like literally, pop art masterpiece, visually as well as orally. What a great record. And again, I put that on a lot when I don't know what to play. And thank you, Chris, for kind of pointing that out, that sometimes we have go-to albums. And of course, these are amongst my top 10, obviously. I may choose a slightly different list every time. Number 10, and then I'll have a bonus, is a comp. In fact, number 10 and 11 are comps. And that's the Smiths' Louder Than Bombs. Now, I could pick The Queen Is Dead. I could pick Meat Is Murder. But when it comes down to it, I always pick this. And this, to me, this is one of those brilliant comps, very much like Weird Scenes from the Gold Mine by the Doors and Neil Young's Decade, where it's not specifically a greatest hits album. It's singles with some sort of deep cuts or alternate cuts. And this has a lot of the singles on here. This was initially an American comp, a double album. Every song on here is great. And I would probably suggest, rather than the strict best of the Smiths, if you don't know the Smiths, this is the album to get into the Smiths too, because you have really, you see the brilliance of Johnny Marr and Morrissey, and of course, the rest of the band, Mike Joyce, and you just see this. This is the greatest band, as far as I'm concerned, ever out of Manchester. And this is probably the greatest band of the 1980s. I think, in so many ways. But I play this a lot. This makes me feel good. This makes me smile. I love it's not overproduced. There's some just beautiful guitar work by Johnny Marr. Brilliant. He's got a very unique style of his sort of. He play leads as a rhythm guitar player essentially, and by listening to it, you'll know what I'm talking about. So, The Smiths Louder Than Bombs. And for number 11 as a bonus, just because this voice just gives me chills every time I hear it. And this is another one that's a comp. I have individual albums, but I like his hits and I like this overall thing. The all-time greatest hits of Roy Orbison. This is Monument Records. I believe, in fact, I know there is a version of this that Steve Hoffman kind of did back at some point 20 years ago, whenever, and if you can find that copy 25 years ago maybe, it's a beautiful sounding record. This is my original 70s comp of this record, and it's got everything from Only the Lonely, In Dreams, Crying, Candyman, Blue Angel, Leia, Pretty Paper, Blue Bayou, Oh Pretty Woman. I mean, every track, and that voice he had literally till he died. Roy Orbison, one of the great vocalists, one of the great songwriters ever. And those are 11 albums that I play the most. Thank you, Chris, for doing this, Long Cut Chris. Why don't you try this? It's fun. It's just a fun little experiment. Not even experiment. This is reality. Love you. Mazzy loves you.